For decades, Southeast Asia powered its economic rise on a simple premise: build the factories, make the world's goods, and ride the manufacturing wave to prosperity. But right now, across the region, the machines are going quiet. Take Malaysia's MPI polyester plant. For 30 years, they were a dominant producer of the lightweight plastics used in everyday food and beverage containers. In January, they shut their plastics division down completely. Their profit margins were wiped out overnight by a flood of ultra-cheap foreign imports. The devastation in Indonesia's textile industry is even steeper. The manufacturing giant Sritex, which supplied global retailers like Walmart and Uniqlo, recently collapsed, putting over 10,000 people out of work in a single blow. In the last 4 years alone, the Indonesian textile sector has hemorrhaged 250,000 jobs. Economists are tracking a structural shift that goes far beyond a typical downturn. Former Indian chief economic advisor Arvind Subramanian calls this phenomenon the China squeeze. Developing Asian nations spent half a century trying to catch the overflow of the Chinese economic miracle. Today, the sheer crushing scale of China's industrial output threatens to dismantle the very industrial base these countries built to secure their future. This diagram illustrates an economic model known as the Flying Geese Formation. Developed in the 1930s, it maps out how Asian economies grow. A lead country, like Japan, gets rich and moves up the value chain into high-tech services. As they leave low-skill manufacturing behind, the trailing developing nations step into that vacated space to build their own wealth. But China isn't acting like a single lead goose. Because of its massive scale, it operates like an entire flock. Instead of moving up and leaving the bottom rungs open, China is expanding to dominate the top of the technology ladder, while refusing to let go of the lowest tiers of cheap manufacturing. The result is a simultaneous chokehold on both ends of the market. Beijing is aggressively exporting highly advanced top-tier products like electric vehicles and solar panels, while concurrently pumping out an endless volume of low-cost shoes, clothing, and basic plastics. Inside Chinese manufacturing hubs like Dongguan, a slowdown in the domestic real estate market has left factories with massive overcapacity. With local demand faltering, producers have to send their surplus somewhere, and they are relentlessly flooding neighboring Southeast Asian markets at prices local competitors cannot possibly match. Even when countries like Vietnam manage to capture a slice of the supply chain, they are often just assembling parts. Traders in Dongguan report that many Southeast Asian facilities lack core research and development capabilities, relying heavily on Chinese engineers who fly in weekly to run the actual production lines. The brief window of rapid industrialization that lifted places like Taiwan and South Korea out of poverty is closing. The leading economy simply refuses to leave the lower rungs of the ladder. If you compare the region's shipping manifests to its bankruptcy filings, the numbers don't seem to add up. Southeast Asia's manufacturing exports to the West are currently booming, yet their domestic factory owners are simultaneously closing their doors. This map highlights the dependency driving that contradiction. Major export hubs like Vietnam and Cambodia now source up to 60% of their critical raw industrial inputs directly from China. Without those cheap materials flowing in, factories in Southeast Asia would instantly lose the pricing advantage that allows them to sell their finished goods to lucrative markets in the United States and Europe. But bringing those materials in opens the door to a fatal counterstroke. Alongside the raw inputs comes a tidal wave of aggressively priced, finished Chinese retail goods, wiping out the local producers who rely on domestic shoppers to survive. Local governments are effectively paralyzed. They know their economies rely heavily on Beijing's capital to keep export numbers up, making them hesitant to retaliate. Even when a nation like Malaysia attempts to intervene by slapping anti-dumping tariffs on Chinese plastics, the sheer volume of imports overwhelms the defenses. To survive as players in the global export game, Southeast Asian nations are being forced into a brutal compromise, hollowing out their own foundational industries just to keep the assembly lines moving. This chart shows the financial toll of that dynamic. In 2025, China's trade surplus with the ASEAN bloc spiked by 45% in a single year, hitting a record $276 billion. Malaysian Deputy Finance Minister Liu Chintong has warned that as Asian nations are forced to compete against this surplus, they risk turning on each other, triggering ruthless price wars and broad economic recessions across the region. And the pressure is moving up the technological ladder. Last year alone, China's export of electric vehicles, batteries, and solar panels into Southeast Asia jumped by over 50%. Now, Beijing is laying the groundwork for an even deeper level of control. Chinese tech firms are pouring massive investments into data centers and the underlying digital architecture of Southeast Asia. China is embedding its entire industrial ecosystem into the region, exporting the technical standards that define how business is done. Once a developing nation's digital and industrial backbone is built on these proprietary standards, switching to a different network becomes nearly impossible. This reliance on external capital and technical staff has allowed growth to continue, but it has also removed the urgent pressure for local governments to reform their own labor laws or invest in homegrown engineering talent. How can an emerging economy carve out an independent foothold when they are competing against a giant that controls every step of the process? Cheap Chinese inputs provided a convenient shortcut to prosperity, but they also stripped Southeast Asia of the incentive to make long-term investments in homegrown technology, labor education, and structural reform. Millions of workers are now trapped at the bottom of the value chain, watching as their own industrial future is bartered away.